All righty. Are we ready? All right, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. It is Tuesday, May 17th, 2022. This is a special meeting number 2 of the Commissioners of Rehoboth Beach. We are live at City Hall's Commissioners Room, second floor. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 2:03 p.m. With that, we'll do a roll call. Commissioner Sharp is still absent. Commissioner Jay Legree.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Chernowski.
Here.
Commissioner Susan Gay.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
And Mayor Stan Mills here. We have a complement enough to formally conduct business. We have a quorum. With that, I want to identify that no correspondence has been identified for meeting number 2. Purpose of this special meeting is for the continuation to review the draft CDP as referred to the mayor and commissioners by the Planning Commission on May 13, 2022, in order to prepare for consideration of adoption by the mayor and commissioners on or before July 29, 2022. As you know, this is meeting number 2. We had our first meeting on the CDP this morning at 9 o'clock. We adjourned that meeting and are now opening up meeting number 2. I think the sequence of items that we will take in the following order. Chapter number 2, 4, 5, 7. Then we'll likely go to the appendix and then go to chapter 1 and chapter 8. At some point, we will close this meeting and identify when our next meeting will be and what our topics will be. So in other words, I'm not anticipating that we're going to finish everything today, leave something for the next meeting, but who knows? We'll see. Again, we went through this page by page on the last chapters. I thought that, although laborious, was productive, and I'd like to do that again, starting now with chapter 2. Before we begin, I'll turn it over to Lauren and Glenn. Do you have anything new?
I don't, Mayor. Thank
New epiphanies that happened since the last meeting?
I wish. Haven't had one of those for the last 5 years.
No?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
All righty, very good. Thank you very much, Lauren. With that, we're going to go page by page. As we go through pages, please speak up. Page 2-2. This chapter is the introduction to the planning process. Page 2-3, which I led off this morning's meeting, reading portions or excerpts from page 2-3 that gives the authority, et cetera. And we had an explanation of force of law and development that continues on page 2-4. 2-5, 2-6, 2-7, and 8. We're going to go to 2-9. 2-10. And at the top of page 210, it mentions some of the unresolved inconsistencies, and those are ongoing, and we discussed them this morning. Page 2-11. It is interesting to note, I know we had a little trouble with mapping and time constraints and things being extended. I think that everybody that's worked on this has done a phenomenal job, and it's not just been the Planning Commission members. Some of the commissioners have been very attentive in giving comments, but also the city secretary, the IT department members, building and licensing members have had to have input on this, and they deserve a pat on the back also for all the work that they've done on this. It is interesting to know that the surveys were last done in 2019, and so it's been a while, but hopefully we find them still reflective of what the community wants today. Page 2-12. and 213, and 214. Now, if nobody has any comments on 214, which is blank, I was saying, who's paying attention today? Huh? Add a little smile there. Okay, okay. So that takes care of chapter number 2. I think we're good for that, baby. We're going to go on next to chapter number 4. And we'll start with page 4-2. I read through some of that, I think this morning. Oh, no, I didn't. Land use. I'd like to just read a preface here real quick, and that's on the top of page 4-2. And then ask Glenn for discussion of land use issues as it deals with the CDPs and the force of law. Quoting from chapter 4, land use and annexation of the city's draft CDP. Land use is the general term referring to the actual uses or activities that occur on a parcel of land at any given time. Land use defines a community's physical form and function. It provides a framework for all infrastructure-related decisions, including transportation, economic development, utilities, community facilities, parks, and environmental protection. It's important to note that land use is not the same as zoning. Zoning is a tool a municipality uses to regulate what can be built on a parcel of land and how it should be developed or redeveloped. Like land use, zoning can change over time, and how land is used in a community is largely guided by its land use plan as implemented through zoning ordinances. Zoning ordinances not only determine the types and locations of homes, businesses, stores, and public facilities in a community, but also includes guidelines for the size and placement of buildings and establishes requirements for parking and other infrastructure. In many ways, zoning ordinances are the most important and powerful tools communities possess and are intimately intertwined with all aspects of the comprehensive plan. If we can, let's take a pause real quick. I've always been interested in the relationship of CDPs and land use, in particular with the force of law. My understanding in brief is that land use, of course, are items that we must address within 18 months. But the way I think some people read it in here, which I think is incorrect, is that land use things that have to be addressed within 18 months are a must-do. So that's such that if it says you will rezone the second block of X Street from residential commercial, that is a must and it must be done. And I guess I want you to clarify, is that true or not? Because my take over all these years always been that you must address the zoning issues, the land use issues within 18 months. But what that means is you discuss it, you put it on the agenda, you adopt a resolution most likely to go to public hearing. You conduct that public hearing and then you take a vote. And it's the result of that vote, they can vote it up or they can vote it down. Even though the CDP says you will vote it up, we have that opportunity. It's not a given because we allow the public to have their comment. And I just am I'm a broken record for those that have listened to me over the years, but I'd like you to address that, please.
Sure. So, so when you just mentioned that you as a Board of Commissioners allow the public to talk in a zoning change, it's not just that you allow them, it's a requirement under state code that you conduct a public hearing in connection with for example, a zoning change. So we'll take your example. Say the CDP says that some parcel is going to be rezoned from commercial to residential, or say the CDP says some parcels shall be rezoned from commercial to residential. And it's true that under state law, the city has 18 months to act on that statement within the comprehensive development plan. But the mayor's right when he says that you're required to take action on it. You're not required to actually do the rezoning. So what would happen is you would schedule a public hearing like we do with every rezoning and every land use application because we're required to under state law. And you're required to hear from the public and you're required to take the public's comments into consideration when you make your determination as to whether to rezone the property or not rezone the property. If the CDP, if once you adopted the CDP and it was certified by the state, if you were only left with the option of rezoning that property within 18 months, then the public hearing would be a sham, right? It would be a waste to even have the public hearing because it's a predetermined outcome that you're going to rezone it. So you have the public, so you're required to take action on it within 18 months, but you could always get to the end of the public hearing and say, we thought that was a good idea, and that's why we put it in the plan, but now that we've heard from the public and did a little more research, it's not a good idea. So you could vote it down or choose not to rezone it, and then you'd go back to the state for a comprehensive plan amendment to amend your plan so that it does not say we're going to rezone this parcel. So it is a little bit of a misnomer when people say if it says it in the plan, it has to happen within 18 months. You have to initiate the action within 18 months and resolve it one way or the other, but you don't have to do exactly what the plan says if after a public hearing your minds have been changed. Is that what you're getting at, Mayor? A little bit?
Yeah, exactly. And I guess I think it's important because, again, I think the Chapter 4 land use and annexation is probably the most important
I agree with that.
chapter in here. And what I find of interest, we haven't gotten to it yet, but I think in the implementation chapter, there's a mention of, they make a statement that there are no land use changes proposed in this thing. So therefore, we do not have to address anything within 18 months. What I wanted to confirm with you is many places throughout the draft CDP, it mentions consider adopting a new mixed-use zone. Consider rezoning any currently permitted commercial uses and things like that. So I want to confirm that when it says consider, that is optional for us. It does not fall into
Yeah, I think
requirement.
that's correct, Mayor. So I think the word consider is a good one because it encourages you as a Board of Commissioners. Of course, you've got a full plate of things and you're going to have to prioritize what you choose to consider that's in the plan. So it is optional. When the word consider is used, it can be considered as aspirational in some respects, but it's not required.
Any questions? Very good. Thank you very much, Glenn. With that, we're going to move on to page 4-2, 4-3, and 4-4, 4-5, 4-6, the very last sentence on page 4-6, just need to check that for wordsmithing. The coastal area has considerations should be taken into account. There's something funky with the wording there. Page 4-7.
Mayor, on those, could these maps be split into two separate pages? Is that necessary?
Yeah, enlarge them, one per page. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think we'll give you a generic note, Lauren. Again, what I said earlier and what Commissioner Gossett just requested is if we could put these on full pages so that they're so valuable, we need to be able to see them. Page 4-8.
It's a question on, if we could, at the very last paragraph there, under future land use, it talks about mapping analysis done in 2020 to compare the city's official zoning map to future land use categories. It was created during the most recent Sussex County parcel, yada, yada, yada. I wonder, Lauren, can you just helpfully explain the benefits of doing this action here, comparing?
Sure. So we, This is an exercise that we often do to see where there may be discrepancies. So, for example, if you have areas shown on your future land use map that are residential, yet the zoning map shows them as commercial, that those two, there's a conflict between those two. So this helps us to see if there are areas that we want to change on the future land use map to reflect current zoning or something of that nature, or vice versa. But I think it's good practice to at least see where those discrepancies may be in order to help with the implementation process that Glenn just described, looking at zoning within, after the plan's adopted, just to give a baseline. And if there are those items that we can amend earlier, so, changing future land use now to enable a rezoning or what have you after adoption, or to set the stage for that, it's one less revision that needs to be done and go back to the state to revise the plan.
Is that something that's going to catch us up, that the force of law of a map? Maybe I just don't understand it quite enough.
Well, I mean, it's showing discrepancies, but I think if the plan doesn't say the map has identified this discrepancy and therefore the city shall bring them into alliance by rezoning or doing, then I don't think you're obligated to do anything.
Patrick, anything else?
Not on that page, thanks.
So 4.8, we're fine with. 4.9 is the tables. 4.10.
One question on that, again, the very last paragraph, it indicates that the last time the official zoning map was updated was July 16th, 2010. Is there any state requirement or any guideline as to how often the zoning map should be reviewed or updated, or just as action occurs?
There's not, but you'll see on the next page, actually, I'm surprised it says there's no land use actions, because the next page actually does say that the city will update the zoning map. So, but there's not a state requirement that says every 10 years you have to do it or anything like that.
But whatever is reflected on the adopted map is what we need to act on, correct?
Well, it's what should be included within the CDP, but if based upon the next page you update the zoning map, yeah, it should be take the existing zoning map and make changes to it to make the new one.
Right. Okay.
All right, page 4.11.
So on 411, I saw, Mayor, in the table for a single-family residence district, the purple one, it says that that's 484% of the acreage. I think it's 48.4.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just grew by 4 times. But then in the paragraph in the middle, as one of the CDP's first implementation items to ensure information is correct prior to making land use decisions, the city will review and adopt an updated official zoning map utilizing the most current GIS parcel data layer. So this, I think, is a requirement based upon the language of the plan. Did you see it differently, Lauren?
So this item in part stemmed from some of the mapping issues that were ongoing. So it's not that we would be looking to change any actual zoning
Right.
per se, but
Right.
to, I guess, refresh the tools used to create the zoning map, so that it's, using GIS, which is a geographic information system. It's a standard mapping tool. That's really what that item was referencing.
And I don't think anybody's objecting to updating the zoning map that I've heard, but I do question whether the word will means that, it's now a obligation of this body to update the map.
Well, yeah. And just to kind of clarify in my mind, that same paragraph, but relating back to page 4-8 on existing land use, the opening line there says, "The city does not have an existing parcel-based land use GIS inventory," parens identified as a recommendation at the end of this chapter. So does this kind of lead us to, down the road, that our updated zoning map should be based on a parcel-based land use GIS inventory, which currently doesn't exist in the city? Or how does that kind of interrelate there?
That's a good question. I mean, the GIS parcel data layer, really, the only one I know that exists is the county's maps, or the state's maps, I guess. County, I guess.
Parcels are maintained by the county and by each of the counties, and those get fed up to the state.
Right. And so that, I mean, saying that it's GIS-based necessarily is, you know, unless we're going to create our own GIS base, we would use the counties, and if you recall, and I think it's public now that some of the county GIS data doesn't match the city's data.
So I'm just, you know, looking at implementing this, and I think we do have a GIS-based system on our own parcels.
Is ours
although-
GIS-based?
Yes.
Okay.
That's created in-house, but it is based on block and lot number as opposed to parcel number. We identify parcel numbers, but our system is lot and block. So again, it's not conflicting, but to me, this one comment on 411 states, first implementation is to ensure information is correct prior to making land use decisions, review and adopt an updated official map using the most current GIS parcel data layer. So I don't want to back ourselves into a corner if that information doesn't exist, or the only information that exists is county-based. So I just bring that as I don't want to make it another unresolved issue, but just how do we go down that road?
Well, is it safe to just delete utilizing the most current GIS parcel data later? I would assume that if it's available to us and we do this, that we would automatically do it. Do we need to be told to do it? Is one of the questions.
It certainly gives you more flexibility if you delete that portion of it.
In part, I believe, I could be mistaken, but I believe that the map itself, or the system used to create the official zoning map didn't have the individual parcels identified with a zoning category. So instead of 123 Main Street being commercial, there was a shape of a block that was commercial zoning. So it's a little bit more cumbersome to use a system like that, because you're not as easily able to pinpoint one particular parcel or something like that. Does that make sense, that description? So I think that in part, at least, was some of the conversations that we had held about trying to just make this a little bit more current and usable.
What do you think about deleting that section, Patrick?
Well, it would give us, I hate to say more wiggle room, but I just think that to do it correctly, that we really need to use the GIS-based system. I mean, that's what everybody uses, and that's when you go to a real estate closing or something of that nature, that's the data that is used and most generally accepted. So again, if we're going to make the change, we haven't changed the map in 10 years or so, when we do it, we should do it based on the most accurate and generally accepted data. So, if we want to strike that utilizing the most current GIS parcel data layer, it would give us flexibility, but I would hope that whenever that change occurs or the zoning map is adopted, that it would be based on, as factual and accurate information as we have available.
Well, I think you got Lauren on board now as the planner. You're going to have her to sort of advise you as to what is the best mapping source to go with. I'll just be straight with you that I think this language utilizing the most current GIS parcel data layer, the only GIS parcel data layer I know of is the counties.
Right.
So
So it would require us to use that.
it certainly suggests that to me, but
It does, it says it pretty clearly. Yeah.
I think I would lean toward taking it off, and we'll do the right thing when the time comes. What would
Do
you?
you have any consultant comment on that? Lauren?
Lauren, most of the jurisdictions you work with use the county's data, right? That's what probably you're more used to.
They definitely split, and for those that do maintain their own GIS system, some of them do use the county's parcel layer as a base, or the municipalities will, any changes that are made will work with the county to get their parcel database updated. So it's really a mix, but I think the intent behind this was more so to utilize more of that graphic representation, the parcel maps, so that it ended up being a tool that was more useful than a static PDF map, if you will. But I think best practices would be to use some type of a parcel GIS layer, at least as a starting point, to I guess transition or update those. But the specifics of that, obviously can be worked out and discussed more so how to approach that task when it comes time to tackle it.
So include it, omit it, or do a hybrid and put when appropriate.
To me, I would leave it to bring us to a higher standard.
Okay. We'll do it. If we find that there's problems with it, then I think then that's, if there's problems with it, then they'll surface. I have a question on, Glenn, you mentioned something about strong language will review and will adopt. We haven't resolved that, I guess, is one thing, but I'm still trying to figure out some of the nuances here. This is in the body copy, that we will do something. And later on, here's the action items that doesn't say it doesn't even mention it, other than to review the city's zoning map for consistency with comprehensive plan's future land use map. But, so I would think that should be an action item, because it's you will do something.
I probably would have included it as an action item. I don't know. It's one of those items, though, that I don't think, again, is going to invite any kind of legal challenge, because there's nothing on the current zoning map that affects somebody, that somebody would be treated differently under a new zoning map. Because as Lauren said, there's no proposal to change the zoning designation of any actual parcel. So while I think it's an action item that you're required to act on, if you use the word will, it's not one that gives me concern about future litigation if you, for some reason, don't get it done in 18 months.
So if anybody's receptive, then an action item, which is, we get to it on page 4-17, but could be just rewording of what's here on 411, which is action item, the city will review and adopt an updated official zoning map utilizing the most current GIS parcel data later in order to ensure information is correct prior to making land use decisions. Something like that.
Was there any reason the Planning Commission didn't want that as an action item? Or is it not discussed as whether it goes on the table or not?
I don't recall it being specifically discussed. I think that perhaps it was almost intended to go hand in hand with the action item A, which was to review the zoning map for consistency, or the more general, within 18 months, ensure that consistency between the two, one way or the other. I think it was just an oversight that it wasn't more specifically called out as its own standalone action
Gotcha.
item.
I mean, either way, I mean, it doesn't hurt to add it, I think.
Commissioners? Are you okay with adding it to the action item? All right. So we'll get back to 417 in the action items in a minute. We're on 411. We're going to now go to 412. Commissioner, did you have something?
Yeah, I've got a lot, like, when it starts coming to
Did
this
you have it
area.
on 412?
412, yeah. My first concern is we're now first starting to talk in the second paragraph here about consideration should therefore be given to rezoning commercial properties within the city that adversely impacts surrounding residential neighborhoods. That's a red flag for me.
It's actually in the 2010 CDP and never done. I think that's why it made its way back in here.
Again. Well, I have concerns when we're starting to talk about rezoning.
Well, remember my clarification I asked of Glenn earlier that because it uses the word consideration or consider or whatever, it's not mandatory that it be addressed.
Fair enough. It's just one of those things out there that is a little concerning for me. And the last paragraph there, appropriate oversight of oceanfront commercial establishments is a special concern. Essentially mandating or suggesting that any oceanfront property would have a site review process. Is that normal? Is that something currently in practice?
It's not something that's currently in practice. There's certain criteria that push something to site plan review, and there's not a requirement that an oceanfront commercial property go through site plan review. Remember, the building official has the option, if for some reason they feel it should go to site plan review, the building official can always refer something to site plan review, but it's not the current practice for every beachfront, every oceanfront property to proceed through site plan review.
Well, Glenn, how would you interpret that?
Well, I think that probably what this is getting to is, the boardwalk in some ways is the city's postcard, and you want to give it ample attention so that it remains, sort of that way. This isn't, going through site plan review. It isn't. So what came to mind was illegal overlay zoning districts, but this isn't saying that they have different zoning rules on the boardwalk. They're just saying that this would just be saying there's special attention given to the boardwalk area, just like, for example, if some municipalities have historic areas and there's special requirements that they have to comply with. So
It's here as an action item. On page 417, action item I. Add the category of oceanfront commercial buildings to those for which a site plan review is required.
So on page 412, it doesn't give you a dictate, whereas the action item does. Just FYI.
And I think this is, if my memory serves me correctly in discussions, this is as much a focus on sea level rise and climate change with regards to the oceanfront building and just the ability to fall in line with Army Corps and, you know, those types of issues also, because that certainly is happening. And, you know, there are certain issues to deal with. Like, you know, we've encountered those when we're looking at building the new beach patrol headquarters and the heights of that and the setbacks from that and those types of things. So I think this is also, you know, concerned with sea level rise.
So refresh your memory on what now has to go in front of site plan review? Is it
4 or
based-
more dwelling units, the development or redevelopment of a parcel of land or adjacent parcel of land in excess of 20,000 square feet, a commercial project over 15,000 square feet of gross floor area, or which requires substantial renovation or increased intensity of usage. 4, a development requiring a change in zoning. Or 5, any other site plan referred to the Planning Commission by the building inspector until a site plan has been reviewed and finally approved for such projects by the Planning Commission. So there's five categories there.
So that would also include residential then, if the building inspector referred it?
Well, this action item, though, the action item is just for oceanfront
Oceanfront
commercial
property.
buildings.
Yeah. And that's
But-
why I say I think it's as much related to sea level rise.
Right.
Is a
And
condo a
climate
commercial
control.
building?
I'm sorry?
Is a condo a commercial building?
No, I consider that residential.
Residential?
It's residential use.
The
What
use,
if they
yeah.
have retail on the first floor?
The retail would have to go through.
Yeah. But again, I think that's why the designation of oceanfront, because it's more of focus with climate change and sea level rise. And our infrastructure of, you know, stormwater management, and as we're having issues with extending outfalls or pipes collapsing or this type of thing, or, you know, voids happening in the streets. Again, that's how I remember the conversation taking place around the, you know, majority of this discussion.
Ed, do you want to?
I just, it's, so some of this is I'm reading it for the first time, so, you know, I'm just kind of, it's just a red flag that I thought worth mentioning. And I think in most cases, anything that is going to be redeveloped on the boardwalk is probably going to, one of those 5 categories is probably going to trigger a site plan anyway, but it's something that hasn't been articulated or done in the past for that reason alone, based on where it's located, that I think it's worth, you know, just us having the discussion.
I guess putting this in a little bit of perspective, that when the Sands redid the, they put that kind of tiki hut out front and the permanent compliance came here, that was a new structure. Would that be sent to site plan review under this language?
I would think so. Yeah. Which has nothing to do with climate change, right?
I mean, sea level rise, if they're
Yeah.
building
It's
a,
just a matter of the closer to the ocean.
Right.
yeah, as the ocean gets closer to the boardwalk.
That's fine, but then what makes a residence different than a commercial property when it comes to climate change? Let's not use that as an excuse and not use it all around.
Well, again, I think it's not residential versus commercial, that they decide here, oceanfront property.
No, but it's in the action item, it says
It's,
oceanfront
yeah,
commercial.
it's only commercial.
Maybe it should be oceanfront
Yeah.
properties.
I mean, we talked earlier about a historic district or something. There's nothing more historic than our boardwalk, right? We don't have advertisements on there. We're concerned about where antennas are. So having an extra layer of compliance, I think, makes sense. We don't want to junk up the boardwalk, right? Isn't that what that's saying in plain language?
Can we soften it a little bit by saying, using the word consider or whatever, but to give us the opportunity for more discussion than we would have right now on this topic, and include the words oceanfront property, so that it is broader.
I'm trying to remember what ocean block, when I built my house, the ocean block, there were different compliances. But I think that went away. And do any of us know if there's still a different set of requirements for ocean block?
I think that may be referring back to the FEMA maps. They've been revised.
Could be, because I had to send it off to Dover to get it
Yeah,
approved.
because that was one of the issues of the underground parking, I think, along getting the FEMA approval of that. And again, it's a layer to go through, true, but I think it's just something that.
I think
protection of
for climate change reasons, it might be good to leave that oceanfront requirement there. Because there's only a tiny wedge that wouldn't be affected the way it sounds. 15,000 with a number of caveats. What are those 5 again?
Let's go here. 4 or more dwelling units. No building permit shall be issued for any project or projects that individually or collectively involve 4 or more dwelling units. Second point, the development or redevelopment of a parcel of land or adjacent parcel of land in excess of 20,000 square feet. 3, a commercial property over 15,000 square feet of gross floor area, or which requires substantial renovation or increase in intensity of usage. 4, a development requiring a change in zoning. Or 5, any other site plan referred to the Planning Commission by the building inspector.
Well, I can think of some that wouldn't have to do a site plan if that wasn't in there. Because there are a lot of less than 15,000 square feet.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room. This sentence is concerning to me because throughout the rest of section 4, there are elements where it appears as though, to me, that there is an attempt to restrict commercial use, whether it be rezoning, in this verbiage, the term repurposing of commercial structures and land uses is mentioned, protecting the residential neighborhood abutting commercial properties is used quite a bit. Ensure the city's land use and zoning codes are drawn to avoid any adverse impacts of commercial development upon residential neighborhoods. There's a ton of additions here, and what this seems like to me is a mechanism to help stop commercial development of commercially zoned properties.
A lot of this is in the current CDP. I'd say most of it is in, except for about the site plan review, a lot of that is in, and what, all the things you've just read are things that most people want. I don't think it restricts it, but I think it's the scale. I mean, that's seems like what it's always been about.
Commissioner Gay, you may be right, but I wasn't here 10 years ago when the last CDP was written. And if things weren't acted upon in the past 12 years, that's the former mayor and commissioners and planning commission's problem. But what's before me now is concerning, as it's could be used as a mechanism to devalue our commercial zoned areas.
I don't read it that way. I read it as balance and scale and density. And allowing a provision for mixed use. I think you mentioned the word repurpose. It's probably in the mixed use section, because there's been a lot of talk for years about wanting to have mixed use, residential and commercial.
Sure,
There's a lot of interest in that.
And I'm all about that. And if you move into the mixed use section, which is the next section on page 12, the last paragraph says, any zone within the city allowing mixed residential and commercial uses should restrict short-term rentals, establish density controls with on-premise parking requirements, provide incentives to deliver high-quality site and architectural design, and include provisions that both ensure the new mixed-use developments are not only compatible with the city's existing architectural character and scale, but also to not adversely impact the quality of life in surrounding and nearby residential neighborhoods. Almost everything there is subjective. What is a short-term rental? What I would hope is that any mixed-use development that we have, commercial on the bottom, residential on top, would allow for, I'm not suggesting weekly vacation rentals, but I want those places to house the lifeguards,
The short-term rentals are the week vacation rentals. That's what short-term rentals are synonymous.
correct.
is that defined?
There is a
The-
definition section in the appendix. I don't know if it is or not. I'll
I don't know
look
if
at it.
that specifically is defined, but the conversation surrounding that in particular was that the Planning Commission did not want the potential for mixed use to become another opportunity for the week-long summer rentals at very high rental prices, knowing that there's also there aren't a lot of affordable housing units or workforce-type housing units for the lifeguards, the firefighters, et cetera. They thought that this might be an opportunity to provide a source for some of that type of housing to take place. So it was really trying to focus more on that side of the residential versus an income-producing weekly rental type.
Which is perfectly fine. I'm 100% with, in situations like that, not having or restricting, vacation rentals. But as long as we all agree that what I consider short-term, 1, 2, 3 months for a J1 student or a lifeguard, those are all acceptable in these areas.
I mean, I would certainly agree with that, but that wording is not in the action item. That wording's in the text, so we're not. we
Yeah,
don't
and
have to
I'm
sort all that
trying
out
to
today, right?
I'm trying to go back and forth between the two,
I
and
know, I
it's
get it.
becoming difficult.
I don't think we have too many oceanfront properties that are not on the boardwalk. And I'm about as defensive of commercial enterprises on the boardwalk as anybody here. But we're looking at climate change, weather events, sea level rise. There's just too many things that that factor into site plans. And I think it only affects a tiny wedge of people in the first place. So I'm interested in that action item staying where it is.
I would agree. I think it's a good addition. And
What's a good addition?
the action item to add to site plan review, the oceanfront commercial property.
Aye. You like the wording the way it is, or do you want to add consider?
If you want to.
You want to change it from oceanfront commercial building to oceanfront properties?
Yeah, that's the only thing, is whether it would be oceanfront properties. I mean, I think it'd be better to be inclusive and say oceanfront properties.
I think this is a question for Glenn. Most often I've seen where, for example, single-family residential is a by right use. It's not something that goes to that would need a site plan unless it's part of a subdivision. So just what legal implications might there be from that perspective?
Yeah, it's certainly not conventional. I can't think of a jurisdiction that sends single-family residential. I mean, a single-family residential in a historic district would go to a historic commission for review. So I do think, I actually think that even as a by right development, it could be sent to site plan review. I mean, there are by rights in the commercial districts as well that still go to site plan review. It basically means that the city can't deny those applications because they are by right, but through the site plan review process, there's an opportunity for the city to influence the way that the development actually occurs. So I think I think you can do it if you want to send single family.
So expand, or change the language to add the category of oceanfront property to those for which site plan review is required?
What do you think?
Yeah.
Just-
Again, I think based on sea level rise and climate change, I know we've gone through that, and there's homes that have been built in the ocean block or on the ocean, that go through dewatering, and the FEMA maps have changed, and I really think that's the focus of this. I understand your point,
I remember them
Edward, but
talking about that, yeah.
but I think as trying to get ahead of it, and as Commissioner Bennett said, the boardwalk is kind of the reason people come. It's the ocean and the boardwalk, and to protect it, and that's really kind of why we exist. So everything else is an amenity, but if that's not there, everything else is going to go elsewhere. I mean, you look at what happened with Superstorm Sandy in New Jersey many years ago. It kind of wiped it all out, and everybody went elsewhere, and they've taken a long time to redevelop in Jersey. So I just think you kind of look at that to make the preparations of, FEMA and their requirements with the new updated mapping, and we have a chapter in our code about FEMA and. That really needs revision also, but I think this is a place to start.
I guess I'd still like adding the word consider so that it alerts everybody that we intend to look at this, but we also want to get input from Planning Commission and the public and others.
I
They're
agree
the
with
ones
that.
who wrote it.
Yeah, isn't this Planning Commission recommendation based on public input?
Yeah, but we just changed it, what I'm saying, we just changed
Oh,
it
that's
from
true.
oceanfront commercial to
Change it from
properties. And if
commercial.
we're gonna do that, then there's not enough time to put it on the agenda for the planning commission. So we either decide ourselves, or if we address it, I don't see why if we address it and we get some kind of questionable feedback from the planning commission and the public, then we could still take out residential, couldn't we? Or is this saying that we absolutely have to do it?
Thinking about this a little more, adding in a residential component, I think might be one of those items that triggers the plus review. I think this is something that state housing would definitely have some thoughts on.
Yeah.
But if we just change it, if we eliminate commercial establishment,
Yeah.
would that, and use property, that would expand and not reduce it, right?
Yeah.
We,
I think that's just
We'll come in the back door.
sneaky way of adding
No, I'm just saying-
residential.
She's saying if it has the potential to encompass residential, it would have to go
Oh,
back.
gotcha.
In that case,
We just leave it
I'm-
alone?
I'm for leaving it alone.
Yeah.
Okay.
I still like consider, but I'm the minority.
No, I agree with you, Mayor.
probably striking out commercial would generate the same need for review if
Yeah.
adding residential
Right, right.
would.
So leave it as is,
I think so.
to keep the calendar going?
Jay, are you for consider or for doing it?
If we, I'd be willing to put consider in. Or I'd be willing to leave it like it is. Okay,
This is for I,
ever
right?
think that I don't know what I'm going? Go ahead, yeah.
Yes or no?
Leave it, I'd leave it, I'd just leave it just like it is. Are you, are you agreeable to that, Mayor? Are you- is
Well, I
that-
wanted to consider, but,
Well,
so that allows for discussion and possibly a different outcome depending on, if you want to,
I would agree with consider as well. Only because where do you, I think as Commissioner Sharnowski said, it becomes very subjective as to then how far out do we go? Like, should we have site plans for everything that get built in town?
Say that, it's very specific to the oceanfront.
Yeah.
Very specific.
I wouldn't agree if we took out oceanfront to any of that, but
Right. No, that's, yeah, I think it was intended to be very specific to oceanfront for all the reasons that Patrick has said.
So one house in doesn't count as oceanfront?
No, I don't think
Right.
so. You mean in from on the side street?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Glenn, I guess another question, for example, similar to the conversation we had about the zoning map change, since this would require a change to the zoning ordinance that would go to a public meeting with the opportunity for input, if this came back and the public was, or whatnot, was overwhelmingly against it, and the Board of Commissioners decided not to do this, then that would just trigger amending the comprehensive plan so there isn't a conflict?
Right. It's right, same thing. Once it goes in here, if it goes in here as it's currently written, you'd be required within 18 months to take it up and conduct a public hearing. And if you decide that it's a bad idea after you've heard from the public, you just go to the state and ask for a comp plan amendment to take this out.
that's interesting. This is not a change in zone
No.
or land use, but you're saying it, because it's within the zoning code, that we would still have to
Site
address
plan
it
is not in
within.
the zoning.
No, it's not. It's in 236,
Yeah. Site plan.
not 270.
Therefore, the 18-month requirement does not apply.
I need to look at that because I think that the state code requires any land use actions be done within the 18 months. I don't think it specifically says zoning actions. I think it's land use.
So even anything that changes part of a zoning code,
This isn't,
any topic,
Yeah.
any topic that changes the zoning code would have to be addressed within 18 months. I mean, I'm not sure that was their intent.
If you're specific to zoning code, certainly it's within 18 months. The question here is because this is outside of the zoning code, is it also subject to the 18-month rule? And my recollection, and I'll look at it in a moment, is that the state code talks about items in the comp plan that affect land use. And I think requiring site plan review for redevelopments is a land use issue, not per se a zoning issue, but a land use issue, and site plan review and subdivision are certainly land use issues.
The provision within Title 22 notes that, I just lost it. Apologies, text is pretty small here. Within 18 months of the adoption of a comprehensive development plan or revision thereof, the jurisdiction must amend its official zoning map to rezone all lands within the municipality in accordance with the uses of land provided for in the comprehensive development plan.
Period? Is that where it stopped?
Yes.
So it's
So
only,
that I don't apply,
so it's only zone,
right?
and it's only zoning changes.
right. So this would not be a zoning
No,
change.
no,
This would just be,
right.
So if
What
we
would it be?
were,
Oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I was going to say, what would it be called then if it wasn't a zoning change?
it comes under subdivision of land and site plan
Site
review.
plan review.
Just a plan review, okay.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a change of zone. We're not
No.
changing the zoning of it.
So, city solicitor, this would not, there would be no public hearing if we were to adopt that.
No, changes to
Adopt that
this
change.
subdivision and site plan review code do not require a public hearing. And now that Lauren's read it, you wouldn't be subject to the 18-month requirement, I don't think, because this is not a change that would change the zoning map. But having the force of law, you're still required to do it.
See, we would still put it on agenda, introduce it, and then at some point have a vote on it. That's where I like the word consider, because it gives you the option. It doesn't inform the public that it's a done deal before you even start. And that's why I like the use of consider versus saying it's a done deal.
So Glenn, if we were to, let's say 6 months from now, put this on an agenda, consider voting for it, and there was an overwhelming amount of input from the public, and we're like, we're not touching it, we would have to go back to the state and ask for an amendment?
I think you would. Yeah, I think you would, because you're not taking up,
So I think for that reason, we definitely need
But it's
to
not a
put
zoning.
consider.
That changes it.
But it's not a zoning issue. I can't imagine for the 300 action items or whatever's in here, having to go back to the state after every one that we renege on.
Well, I think there's a difference between not getting to one of the action items, so just generally, I don't know of anyone who's ever completed the full list of action items in their comprehensive plan, and they deserve a medal if they ever do. But if there's at least my take would be, if there's a decision made that directly contradicts something that's stated in the plan, then that's something that would trigger an amendment. And possibly in part that could, with the 5-year, there's a 5-year interim review that goes back to the state. There's annual reports where information is exchanged. So I think there's potentially, opportunities to not have that be as cumbersome a process as it is during the full-blown review, but.
Well, my assumption would have been that only the land use items, the zoning, rezonings, would have to go back for a change if you disagreed with the recommendation. I can't imagine going back to everything in here that.
this is a little bit of a gray area. I agree that perhaps you would not have to go back, but I would want to have a conversation with the State Office of Planning and Coordination to see if this is something. So if you didn't, so for example, if it says you shall do this and you don't, and you choose not to, or you, for one reason or another, then I suppose what I would argue is that potentially when the next property wants to redevelop on the boardwalk and it gets a building permit from building and licensing without going through a site plan review process, some member of the public could say, that's a development that was just approved that's inconsistent with your plan because your plan says that you're going to send it to site plan review, and you didn't do that. So
Hey,
it's an
that
outside challenge,
that almost makes me want to change every item to consider. So that you have that option, because just like the land use thing, you shall rezone X Street from residential to commercial. We've just talked about where that's not true, because there's the option to go either way, and depending on how the public voices and you vote, the outcome, then you may have to go back and amend the CDP. I don't know, it's just crazy, I think.
Glenn, you've been through three of these, I think, here. I don't believe we've ever gone back for a revision to plus, have we? And I
don't think so. I have in other jurisdictions I have.
Yeah.
For sure, but I don't think we ever have here.
Yeah.
I'd almost hate to go back to them and say, if we say shall and we don't do it, would you like us to do that? Sure, yeah, do that. And then we
Yeah.
overloaded with stuff.
I guess so. The only question here is whether you'd have to go back to plus if you chose not to do this. You still have the option not to do it, whether it says shall or consider. You still have the option not to do it. The only question is if you choose not to do it and it says you will, do we have to go back to plus for a comp plan amendment? And I think giving it some consideration now that it's sort of in a gray area because it's not specifically tied to zoning or the zoning map.
plus comments related to this, and I don't see any specifically.
Well, I've heard Tim, Ed, and I say, use the word consider.
And I'll be perfectly honest, I'm a little bit more sensitive to phrases, and I want to be careful how I phrase this, but there has been quite a few lawsuits that the city has gotten, and if this is, what's written here is considered, the force of the law, and at one time we choose not to, or we choose not to move forward with it, are we going to have lawsuits? Because it says it here in this document, and it's the force of law. I'm, I guess, trying to be a little cognizant of that.
You mean if we use consider?
No, if we don't.
We don't use consider, okay.
Well, I think we're getting away from the meaning of the action item. I mean, if we think it's an important thing, why wouldn't we do it? I mean, we're not changing the zoning of those commercial buildings. We're simply asking that they go through site plan review. What's wrong with that? It doesn't limit it. I mean, the code is the code. We're not changing the code. I don't see what the harm is.
I guess my question would be, what does the review entail then? All of the items you mentioned, right?
Well, that's the criteria if you go through it. It's
Yeah,
the,
then-
then it goes to the planning commission for review of, much like the plus review. It goes to the department heads in the city to see if they meet traffic and the fire protection and police protection and runoff control, landscaping, drainage flow, stormwater management, screening for certain uses, utilities and community facilities.
What about aesthetics?
No, it
think
doesn't,
aesthetics is
there's
on the
no
list,
aesthetics
yeah.
in here. Motorized or non-motorized vehicle traffic flow, drainage flow and structures, stormwater management, signage, recreational and open space areas, height of buildings, existing scale and character of nearby properties, streetscape, impact on nearby properties, airflow, natural light, similar environmental conditions, and health, safety, and welfare concerns.
And parking, probably.
Well, motorized non-motorized vehicle traffic flow, I don't think,
I believe there's no parking for anything, commercial structure facing the boardwalk.
yeah, there's nothing in here about parking.
So, at least right now,
Yeah.
that's the code. I mean, frankly, it looks like all the elements you'd want to protect the #1 site in the city. All the elements that you'd want them to look at for that protection.
I guess a general problem I have, I guess, with some of the CDP is that, these are in front of us for a few minutes. And here we say, oh, okay, we agree that it's in the CDP, and then it's expected to happen just like this. Whereas for me, the word consider means we're going to be a little more deliberate in debating and discussing it, and it's not a definitive thing to happen. And that's just the way I think we should be going a lot of this stuff, that there is actually a lot more time and energy putting into discussing a topic versus just saying, hey, we're going to adopt it in the CDP, because we will have had minimum discussion on it by the time we get to this and vote on it. So,
And Glenn, can you just remind me at least, someone has to go through a site plan review, and all of these things are discussed. But at the end of the day, if they meet the building code, there's nothing that can stop them from moving forward in a site plan review, correct?
If they meet the zoning code, the building code, and whatever state agency approvals they have to get, that's right. If they satisfy all those criteria, you cannot deny them. You can approve it, but with conditions. And that's what the site plan review process sometimes does. It identifies health, safety, welfare concerns about the configuration of the property or a certain use of the property, and you apply a condition to the approval that addresses that concern. But you're right, they can't be denied if all other elements of the code are satisfied.
But they can put conditions. I mean,
They
that's,
can put conditions on it.
Well, I'm with the mayor. I would use the word consider.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that from the standpoint that you look at how this is laid out from the planning commission. These are their recommendations. So I would think that, you know, they've made that determination that they feel this should be an action item as opposed to consider. I don't know if Glenn, you were still part of the solicitor role with the planning commission when this was discussed or not, or Lauren, if you remember any discussions on this, but I just go back to those folks that worked on this for like a couple, 3 or 4 years. And again, as you said, Mayor, on your recommendation, the whole thing's going to go through a public hearing, the whole CDP, correct?
yeah.
I mean, this was not
But
something,
you know, the public hearing's fine and very valuable, but it's not necessarily going to focus on every
right.
action item. I don't think that's realistic at this point. People will pick what is dear to them.
I mean, this was not something we talked about early on in the process, when I was on the planning commission, for example, but I know they talked about it in the most recent iteration for the last year or so, and just in seeing the way the action items come about, that you do have some that are consider, some that are identified, some that are review, and this one is pretty specific, and I have to think that's intentional.
Well, look, we've got Tim. I don't know if you're still on the thought of using the word consider. I am. Ed is. Can't we make a decision and somebody be a tiebreaker one way or another? Let's put it in there so that we're at least the majority's in agreement when we bring this forward. You know what? Like, can't we resolve that today?
Do you want to do consensus or do you?
No. I just want, you know,
Okay,
voice something. Do you want it definitive, or do you want it to be use the word consider? That's all.
I want to leave it alone.
Okay, so we're just going to leave it alone then, as it is. That was,
So do we go back up to 412 because we skipped to the?
well,
matched up the actions?
we're on 412 and we're going to stay on 412, yes. Anything else on 412?
Yeah, I do. I'll try to be more specific. Last sentence, I read it before, but it essentially, and again, I don't know how that translates to the action item, but under mixed use, it is saying restrict short-term rentals. I think we've all agreed that that's not intended for affordable workforce housing, correct? Establish density controls with on-premise parking requirements. So this one I've got it,
Where are you?
the last paragraph
on page
on 412. This is
Oh, got it.
sort of items to take into account or to establish for mixed-use zones. Establish density controls with on-premise parking requirements. So I don't have a problem with this when it's related to new construction, but I don't want to prohibit existing properties that could be a good candidate for mixed use not be used for that manner because they don't have parking. I mean, I can think of a great scenario on Rehoboth Avenue, North Side Beach Block, which would be a great candidate to house seasonal workers, lifeguards, cadets, but it doesn't have any parking. So I kind of struggle with that piece. Why make that a requirement so next in that sentence is provide incentives to deliver high-quality site and architectural design. I'm fine with that, although it's subjective.
I think we did a workshop on mixed use when the CDP first started in the summer of 2018. I remember it well. And there were, these issues came up because in urban settings, they are doing away with parking requirements for mixed use. But we're not exactly an urban setting. I mean, it's hard for somebody to live here. Let me finish. Without a car. But also, you have to remember, we have the lowest parking requirements. And I know that Commissioner Legree has wanted to talk about them, and I think we should. We have the lowest parking requirements of any municipality in the area. And we're shooting ourselves in the foot over time by increasing density and not addressing. And if we don't address them in terms of how the city gets development, then it's just going to get worse.
And I'm fine with new development, but why have an empty building that could house affordable workforce housing sit empty because they can't provide parking because they don't have parking?
Well, I think if you read the rest of the paragraph or the next page, it talks about once this inventory is completed, then to form a committee and look at spur revitalization, encourage economic investment, promote an efficient use of existing infrastructure. So those are goals within this formed committee that they could create those types of benefits, or if it's workforce housing, then you're excluded from any parking requirements, or you're excluded from X, Y, and Z. Those are the incentives that would be in place to bring somebody to the table. I mean, I've had conversations with Dr. Trejo, who owns that property, and he's like, it's just, there's just too much to go through. I'm just going to sit on it. So, but if we then create this committee that has the ability to develop these incentives, as we've always been talking about the only incentive right now we have is, reduce your tax base. If you go from $1,000 a year to $500 a year, that's not much of an incentive, I don't think. But other things of this nature, that certainly could be, and we all know that we've got, larger than family investors looking at this city, and we've already had, properties purchased and managed by larger investment firms and what have you. So it's coming. So this is maybe the way to, as I said earlier, create those incentives or give opportunity for, new ideas at the table.
I hear you, and I understand that. I guess I'm having trouble flipping back between the text of the CDP and then the action items, and they don't always match up in the verbiage.
Is it?
It says examine and evaluate a new mixed-use zoning classification with flexible regulations, community and business stakeholder input limited to the city's commercial district with appropriate design guidelines or standards and protections for nearby residential and commercial properties. Okay.
I went back to the 2010 CDP, and there was the discussion of mixed-use zoning there, and the language regarding density controls and on-premise parking, all of that was language from that plan, so that was just carried through to the current plan. So I don't know that there was a concerted effort to identify any one of those items during this most recent review. I think the 2010 plan seems to be stressing again wanting to provide opportunities for affordable housing. It talks about the aesthetics piece of it, things like that. So at least that's the background related to it from the 2010 plan.
And this was, I think, just trying to be a little more specific. But Ed, do you like the action item J where it says to examine and evaluate?
Yeah,
Flexible regulations and stakeholder input?
yeah, the way that that's worded is fine. It's a little less.
That's really the key, isn't it?
Yeah, that is the key to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with the way that that action item is worded.
And I think it was done that way because it hasn't been defined and it needs input and study.
Anything else on 412?
If I may,
Yes, ma'am.
I actually was able to get in touch with state planning about the amendment issue. So their response was that they do not, and the example that I gave was if the implementation item was said to revise the zoning code to do X, but the ultimate vote by this body was against that, would it need to go back and amend the comprehensive plan? So their response was that they don't think so, but on the annual report, it's recommended that that be highlighted, that the amendment is outlined in the plan, wasn't approved, so just tracking when that might occur, and then at the either the 5-year mark, when the 5-year review is due, or when the 10-year update comes around, just make sure to strike that from the draft at that time.
So that should be normal stuff for us. Okay.
I've got one last thing on this section.
412?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm talking about section 4 in general.
413. You want to finish we've only got, well, do you want to insert something, or do you want us to finish the pages?
We can finish the pages.
All right,
I'll ask for that
page
last.
413, anything? 414. Everybody understands annexation. Remember, we had our discussion about that we have no plans to initiate annexation, as it says, but we will entertain petitions from properties outside the area that want to be annexed. 415. 416. So we start in city positions and goals. 417. 418, and then any of the maps. Got map, I think part of this chapter is map 2, right? State strategies.
This chapter includes maps 2 through
2.
my computer just
3.
froze.
This one is in here,
5.
but it's not identified. It has no nomenclature. It should,
Which one is that? Oh, the zoning map.
zoning map. It's just, it's sitting in there, but, and it ought to be rotated and bigger if you could. This is almost readable compared to this. But again, it needs the nomenclature added to it. We've got map 5, I think, is also part of that section with the annexation growth area. Ed, open it general for anything on chapter 4.
Yeah, and this is probably, maybe not appropriate for the CDP in general, but I'm just, it's a question for you, Lauren. So one problem that I see we have in Rehoboth a lot, and it's this area where it talks about investment in properties and redevelopment. Almost every single commercial property that is leased is a triple net lease. Tenants are responsible for everything. There's no incentive for the property owner to invest in the property or improve things. The tenant doesn't own it, so they don't invest and improve it. And falling down dilapidated buildings with stucco falling, I mean, last week when we had the huge storm, I mean, stucco was flying off buildings, signs. Is there any mechanism to deal with that, or at least force us as the city to start dealing with it?
In other places, I've seen things like that addressed through a property maintenance code. For example, chunks of stucco that are missing from a structure, that if that's something that's identified as something that has a potential fine or something like that associated with it, that's a potential trigger. Others are, if there's if it's a vacant or an abandoned building, a related registry with annual licensing fees and inspections to maintain a minimum quality. And these are just, off the top of my head, some things that I've seen in other locations. I'm sure there are other mechanisms, and I can look into that a little further.
If we would have put something in the CDP that it's a desire for the city to consider these options like that, is that something that would trigger a plus review? Because I think it's important, and I think we need to force ourselves to do it.
Washington DC has what they've referred to as a vacant building ordinance. So that, I mean, it addresses some of the problems. It doesn't necessarily address a absentee landlord that's, as you say, a triple net lease and they're just getting their payment, that's it. But if the building is vacant, there are certain responsibilities that the owner of the building has to take. And if they do not, if it's not occupied within, I think it's 90 days, the tax quadruples, the annual tax quadruples. There's also a registration fee of $1,000 to register the vacant building. That's an annual fee. And that's just what I remember I was Googling it because I went through it a couple years ago. There wasn't any appetite to do anything at that time, but that's one tool you can use. But again, that only addresses vacants, not neglected, if you will.
Just remember, it's not a requirement of the CDP, and we can certainly address that outside the CDP.
I'm just throwing it out there. I think it was an appropriate place to bring it up. Not saying that we have to put it in, just something that I wanted to bring up.
Very good. Anything else for chapter 4?
Yeah, I remember through one draft, several iterations of, I guess, there was addressed the issue of rezoning Schoolview District, and I don't see that in here. Is it disappeared or is it elsewhere in the draft?
Rezoning the school.
Schoolview section of.
School view.
School view,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Neighborhood.
I don't remember ever seeing that in.
Yeah, I do remember it, discussions about it. It was really brought forward because the Planning Commission also had the subdivision of a property there. And there is the covenants of Schoolview prohibit basically what is described in our zoning code. And Glenn, you can help remember this a little bit, but that it was to basically bring the zoning code for, adhere our zoning code to the covenants that were outlined in the original development of the Schoolview neighborhood. I think the lots are, as I go back to one size fits all in that regards, our residential is 50 by 100, and those lots over there predominantly are 75 by 100.
And that's what their covenant requires, 7,500 square foot.
The covenants
lot
do,
size.
correct. So it was,
Bringing our zoning code, rather than keeping it at a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, to
Right.
make it a 7,500 square foot
Correct.
minimum lot size.
yeah.
Like was done with R1S.
Correct,
I mean, similar
yeah.
concept, obviously, not
Yeah.
the same size, but.
No. But I remember discussions about that, and it really was brought about by that application. that started the discussion on the CDP. So I don't know, I know it was part of it, part of it at one point, but
I think I remember that was so that you can't buy 2 lots and put on 3 houses.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is how it was the code.
right,
The
yeah.
covenants of Schoolview when it was first annexed by the city to do that.
Were you on that, Glenn? Did you hear that?
I was
when that
with-
discussion?
I was with the planning commission when that application came through.
Yes.
I wasn't representing them when the planning commission considered that for the CDP.
I'm not sure, did they consider it? Did it come up?
I didn't think they considered it for the CDP. I thought that,
I thought there was, yeah.
Yeah. Talked about it. Well, let me ask it this way. If we don't include it, since it is not in here, A, would adding it make it have to go back to the state? And B, could we act on it anyway if it's not in here?
You guys are asking me
well,
a lot of good questions today.
actually, answer the second question first, because it reminds me of a hotel that recently wanted some rezoning. It was not in the CDP, and yet we considered it.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, you can act on anything, whether it's in your CDP or not. It's just a question of whether you have to go to the state and revise your CDP if you act on it.
So we're not precluded from
Right.
acting on
No.
it if we don't have it specifically in here.
Correct.
And the only advantage, if you want to look at it that way, of not including it in the CDP, is that we don't have that 18-month time
Right,
constraint.
yeah, well, that's,
The only other advantage would be perhaps we don't have to resubmit it to Plus if it was thought that that might trigger that.
And that's when I think if you did include it now, it would trigger a plus, this
I
plan
feel
going back
certain
to
it
plus.
would, Yeah.
Yeah, but I just remember that conversation, so.
I remember the planning commission discussed it sort of right after the application withdrew, but I don't know if it was ever directly in context with the CDP discussions. But I didn't watch them all, after.
Fun.
Yeah, right.
I do recall some of those discussions, and I found a comment from draft number 3 that seems like it was related. Here we go. All right. Okay. The comment here notes that thing about adding that information about the related to Schoolview to Chapter 4, as that was where the discussion of zoning occurs. But if I go back. Not finding anything immediately, but I can certainly look into that a little bit more and go back and find out what happened to that particular comment and how it was addressed or discussed more
Okay.
at that
I just, for
draft
some
level.
reason, it sticks in my brain, but some things do and some things don't.
Well, I think we're in agreed, though, to not include that at this point, that you could bring it up in the future. If it's easy for you to do any homework there, Lauren, you can pass that on to Patrick, I think, because you're most interested in that topic, and then we can decide whether to put that on a future agenda, separate from CDP and all that, so. Anything else for chapter 4? Shall we go for chapter 5 and then look at the time and, might want to call it quits afterwards. Let's go through chapter 5. It may be fairly quick. Chapter 5, page 5-2, 5-3, 4.
Just one question on
Yep.
4.
On 4?
On 5-4. Just, and Lauren, does any of this occupancy tenure, I mean, reading through these, did we consult any of our rental licenses in the city as to the amount we have, or is any of this data based on our numbers in the city of rental licenses issued per year or something like that?
The information specifically on page 5-4 comes from the American Community Survey
Right.
census product.
Right.
We
But
do.
as it's represented, like in figure 5.1, the occupancy and vacancy rates, and then on to, that's from this general study, correct?
Yeah, it even says.
Yeah, the bottom line, American Community Survey.
Correct.
But we don't, do we have the ability to view or investigate our own rental licenses versus housing stock? I'm just curious. Did you ever, did that discussion ever come up?
Related to that particular item, I don't believe
Okay.
so. I think there was some general comments or questions about vacation rental housing. So on page 5-8, a section was added to that addresses that, but in a more generalized manner. So we did not have specific data related to that item.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, 5-5, 5-6, 5-7, 5-8, 5-9, 5-10, 5-11, 5-12, 5-13, 5-14, 5-15, city positions, goals, and action items. 5-16, I need help, and somebody interpret F. Consider long-term affordability programs and tools to preserve public investment and to ensure a sustainable, affordable housing stock. I don't know, maybe I don't understand enough. I don't know how we can sustain an affordable housing stock in our city.
One example that comes to mind might be units that have a that require for at least the 30, 40, 50 years, they have to be rented to those at a certain income level or below. We see that with some incentives, some incentive programs in various zoning codes where you're perhaps given some kind of an incentive to provide affordable housing, but you have to keep it affordable for a set period of time. That's one such example.
Well, let me respond to that, because I don't think that's realistic in our town. When we've had talks before about workforce, or not workforce, mixed-use housing and stuff. And at one point, I think Commissioner Clusie was one that mentioned, we should have a better mixed-use zoning program that promotes workers living above retail. And I was surprised how much feedback I got from people that own local businesses. They said, if you change the rules, I'm gonna put renters in there because that's the highest demand. I get the best thing. Now, maybe there's a way to make rules, I don't know, that says long-term rentals only or something like that. But otherwise, I thought that they were on to something. If we promote it, they're gonna try to do their best to,
Yeah,
so there's nothing affordable about it.
so there's a program, there's one going on right now in Lewis called Dutchman's Harvest, and it's exactly what Lauren's talking about. There are state monies, and if you work with some of the Diamond States, one of them, I think, they work to provide affordable housing. So in that deal, Shell Brothers agreed to sell, I think, 30% of the units, or maybe more than that, to at 10% of our cost or at cost. I forget exactly what it was, but there's all kinds of incentive monies that came to them for doing that, but they have to keep it for 30 years or some long-term amount of time rented to workers in Sussex County of a certain income level. The other units are able to be sold at profit. So there's not many, the Bayview parcel is probably the only one right now that could be redeveloped with that kind of a project.
I'll bet you those projects are miles from the beach, right? Are they within walking distance of the
it's the
beach?
first property
The
on
most
the-
valuable lands?
No.
So,
It's right
I
behind Lowe's.
recognize we've got to have a affordable housing component, so maybe this is fine in there, but I don't think it's realistic
And
whatsoever.
that particular language verbatim came from a plus comment from the Delaware State Housing Authority.
But they don't know our town, I mean,
they-
seriously.
They identify, that there is a lack of affordable housing in the beach communities. But they definitely noted, they were very supportive of the discussion of the mixed-use zoning that was in the draft. And they encouraged the city to consider the following strategies that are particularly effective in resort communities. And item F, G, and H, action items F, G, and H are more or less verbatim from the comments received from Plus on that item.
Can we follow the Henlopen Acres plan?
No, they have no affordable housing.
No, but
they have no-
but these same comments were made when they were going through their process of updating the plan.
But I guess, just to, I understand your comment, Mayor, about, they don't know our community. But if we don't make some consideration or at least some concept or vision, you talk about the businesses in town that, I know COVID had a great effect on it and the J-1 visas had a great effect on it, what have you. But still, there are lesser staff available. Some are only open, 5 days a week as opposed to 7, or they're limiting to dinner service or something of that nature. But if it becomes harder and harder to find employees, and we as a city are not making any accommodations for affordable housing, it's going to start affecting the business, I believe. They're talking about, we talk about also buses. One of the hotels brings their housekeepers and workers in by a bus, once a day and takes them out. So again, it's not something that we can do immediately, but if we just say, well, that's not us, we can't do that, it has a longer term impact that I don't think we're trying to act upon. And again, maybe this is, I know Carol has been working with this, with the chamber trying to find affordable housing, and they've made some small inroads, but I think it's something that needs to be on the table, if you will. in some matter. I agree with you. If you got a $2 million house on the beach, you're not going to turn it over to affordable housing, or that 4-unit condo that sits down there that, has one on the market for a while.
Hey, it's very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Challenging, I mean, we have a hotel down here that could spend millions of dollars renovating, and then for the affordable housing or for workers, rent a room or multiple rooms for $500 a week. When if they get the typical tourist, they can get $1,800 a week.
But
So which would you?
there's always there's an opportunity as well. We've got development projects that are underway, and they're asking for variances or other things. Why can't we say, sure, you can have that variance, but you need to put 5 units attached to that project that's affordable housing?
Yeah,
It's not conventional, it's outside the box, but
we need to be that
it's an
way.
opportunity for us to think that way.
It's a condition that we put on during site plan review.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it has to happen, though, as something gets built, though, right? I mean, because we don't own, does the city own any property where we could create affordable housing?
Parking lot.
I mean, but another opportunity that the senior center will move at some point in the near future. We're talking about a parking garage, we're talking about affordable housing. There's an opportunity, but we need to start planning and thinking for that now,
Yeah.
not 3 years from now.
That's an incentive item that sometimes we talk about. What incentives can we put into the zoning code to cause things? I mean, you could incentivize, you could give a higher density if a certain number of the units are
Right.
affordable. So if you wanted to incentivize it, there are ways.
Yeah.
On the same topic, and I don't mean to throw a wrench in, but we also don't currently allow anyone to rent a single room in their home, correct?
That's right.
Why don't we, if it's just for seasonal workforce rentals? I just had this conversation with Mark Schaefer the other day, and a lot of other municipalities have that specific restriction in place, and they're looking at it and saying, why do we have it in place? I think it was initially so we don't have these daily, weekly people going in and out, but if it's a J1 student for the season, or a lifeguard, or a cadet, or just a, seasonal worker from Philadelphia that wants to be here for the summer, why not?
Require the owner to be on site? Because that's how some of them are done. Because that way, then it doesn't turn into a hotel where you're renting all the rooms to individuals.
Yeah, that's what a lot of Airbnbs are doing. They're requiring, if you rent a room, an owner on site,
Yeah,
which is a
mean,
parable.
put something in place to.
Or you have a 30-day minimum or something.
Oh, yeah, I would even do maybe more than 30 days, but again, we're talking about the need for workforce housing, and there's an opportunity right there.
The kids could sublet their rooms and pick up another $800-900 a month.
So the
can
question really
always
is, are you
think
going to
of
leave this comment in? I mean, you're not going to
Yes.
solve the affordable work housing problem today.
I
but
think we
like-
should leave the comment in.
I think we should say consider.
That was so last chapter.
Sorry, that was F, J, and H that we were just talking about,
Yeah,
right?
and they do
I
say
had a
consider.
couple.
They
It
all say
already
cons-
says
They
consider.
already say consider.
I had a couple questions. Action item C,
Are you on?
page 15, one page up. Action item C, require relevant agencies to report the number and characteristics of complaints regarding rental properties. Who are the relevant agencies? And how would that be done? What is the purpose of it?
Here, I think that might be related to code complaints or basically anyone that might interact with or have an opportunity to receive complaints about rental properties. I think this was to make more transparent the complaints that may be received. So for example, similar to perhaps a monthly crime report from the police department, something similar related specifically to complaints on rental properties, or a code enforcement report that specifically identifies whether the properties are rental or owner occupied, something of that nature.
I know in my neighborhood, there were issues with renters would not adhere to a schedule with putting out either recycling or garbage, so it might be out there 4 or 5 days in front of the house. Would that be an example of?
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to, again, it was sort of this, and I by no means want to go back to this rental versus non-rental, but, you know, a few years ago when we were dealing with the pool and noise and everything, we went back and we were identifying complaints that were owner-occupied versus rented, and a lot of the complaints were coming from the owner-occupied pools and houses. So I just don't know why we're bringing this up now as an issue to be. What issue are we trying to solve here?
Well, I don't know, I don't even know that it needs to be in the CDP, but when I see require relevant agencies, I interpret it as city agencies.
Oh, yeah, I think that
Yeah,
is.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, so the police are gonna report on the noise, which they're capable of doing now. And building and licensing could report on complaints of lack of trash pickup and all that stuff.
Well, I think when we had the police chief doing reports in person several years back, one of his reports was noise complaints or violations of disorderly house or that kind of stuff. I remember that being the part, but we just get it submitted, in writing now, so it really doesn't come to fruition as much as it did in the past when it was a personal report. So I don't know whether that addresses the issue of this or not, but that would be relevant agencies.
Yeah, I
But
just
let
don't.
me ask something. Would you like the police to come back? I used to enjoy when the police, fire department, and building and licensing were there in person to answer questions. And I don't know whether it was during Mayor Coon's term or my term, but one of us ended up cutting it off to try to not have to commit their time to
Well,
come and.
I think two contributing factors to that. One, we used to meet on Friday nights, so the people had to stay late, if you will.
Right.
And I would personally suggest, since we're meeting at 2 o'clock on Fridays, that might be a good thing, but also perhaps to have those here, and I hate to use the word season, but, May or June, July, August, September, the height of the season when there's more activity going on and possibly more issues and things that we should be made aware of. And I think a personal presentation, at least by the police department, and maybe by the code compliant officer would be very valuable to folks.
Well, let me talk with the city manager about that, because I've been thinking about that, and you're right, starting at a 2 o'clock meeting means they would need to be there, 2:15 or something like that, so it may be doable, we'll see. Anyhow, sorry, I interrupted you,
Yeah,
Commissioner.
I just don't want, action item C, and some of the others can be interpreted this as, an attack on rental properties again, and kind of us moving backwards instead of forwards on the city being a collaborative environment.
Identify some of your other ones. You identified action item C.
I just strictly enforce the city's vacation rental housing regulations, health and safety inspections, and licenses, which is, I'm fine, that's A.
Oh, okay.
Continue to monitor overcrowded rental units, large number of cars, et cetera, associated loud and unruly behavior. inventory of the city's stock of vacation rental housing. I mean, we have the number of licenses. I don't know how else to
Well, I think
inventory
that's a
that.
concern of the fact that it's hard to keep track. I mean, as more rentals have gone, you know, to Airbnb and all that, and away from real, there's a belief that we're not collecting the rental tax as we used to. And so I think that was an attempt, I think I heard them talking about this a little bit, that many cities are now, and I know there was a company that Sharon spoke to at least 5 years ago who offered this service of remember, do you remember that, Evan? You were probably here at the time. Yeah. And at the time, we didn't need it. I mean, it was determined that we didn't need it, and they even said that. But as time has gone on and these things get, you know, more diffuse, then it was seen as an attempt to kind of get a handle on that. And I actually think that's a good idea, because I have the sense that perhaps, you know, we do have a number of rentals that aren't licensed.
Lewis, I believe, has a new program, and Dewey Beach has a
Dewey
new
does,
program
too.
where
Oh,
they,
really?
where
Okay.
they
Yeah.
monitor
I didn't know that.
it,
Okay, yeah.
also.
Yeah, so.
Does anyone know, I know VRBO and Airbnb and other jurisdictions actually collect the rental tax.
Do they? I thought that they wouldn't, actually, unless they may have changed. Again, some of my knowledge goes back a few years on that one, but I thought that they would not do that.
I think in some states they do. Yeah.
Can we check into that?
Because ours is volunteer, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's on the honor system,
right.
yeah.
And there's
Yeah,
never,
but should Uber, should Airbnb, if they let you spend the night in the car maybe, but otherwise, all the other agencies, Airbnb and ought to be paying their fair share, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, and more rentals are going that way now.
Yeah.
Even ones that might list with a rental, you know, a realtor here may do both. I think there are a lot of
Well,
places that do both.
the hotels are doing it as well, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Hotels are advertising at Airbnb.
Because they've got houses that are renting as part of their stock, yeah.
We have, I believe, a unique situation here where our rentals, the rental companies collect
Yeah.
the tax and turn it in, and other jurisdictions don't do that. So, I mean, I think we've got a pretty good program.
As our numbers and our vacancies, as our numbers increase and our vacancies decrease, and you can get a pretty good handle on that by paying attention to the chamber's rental page, our revenue should be going up. And we could help ourselves by just tracking that. I don't know whether and I haven't done that, I don't know whether our rental tax revenues have gone up as much as the number of places being rented have increased. I just don't know. Their prices have gone up. So our income, our revenue should have gone up accordingly. I don't think it has.
Anything else, Ed?
no. I think Commissioner Legree, I think there's two things that have happened with that. One, I can tell you I was up 30% last year. But there's also a lot of homeowners that used to rent their house and during the pandemic stopped renting their house. So although
Probably will
more,
continue to stop.
more people started using their homes instead of
Yeah.
renting it, so it's not apples to apples.
Yeah. So you got to factor that in.
Anything else? We'll go page 516, anything else? 517, 518, 519, 520. On 520, action item M, consider development of a tourism management plan for the city.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I don't understand what the tourism management company would do,
Page 5-21. I have the same question, Mayor.
but, and I guess the reason I don't understand what it would do is because I keep thinking about that at times we're fairly crowded in town, how, we're going to try to get even more people in. But we also have the Chamber of Commerce, we've got Main Street,
Well, I don't think that's a
so do we want to,
promotion issue.
get into the tourism
I think that's
business?
control.
Do you know what the intent was, Lauren?
Yeah,
I don't think it's a promotional item.
I think it may relate to traffic control or just the things that the city may deal with related to tourism. So whether it's that, whether it's specifically at the height of the summer, if there's a need for evacuation or things like that, just to in one place just look at tourism more broadly and how the city can
You understand? what
manage those impacts.
not well.
This one, I think earlier on, the mayor had mentioned, would we have drop-off zones for either smaller motor coaches or Ubers? I would think that would be part of this tourism management plan, right?
So more like crowd management, not, is that more of what it is?
That's part of it, yeah.
Perhaps that or seasonal population management or something to address the increase of people coming to the city in the quote unquote summer months. I think that's more what the reasoning for that one was.
I mean, tourism, I think in people's minds, is promotion, is attraction, is, like a tourism convention and visitors bureau, that type of thing. It's what would a lot of people think, but I think what you're saying, it's kind of logistics, it's
managing the impacts of tourism, I think,
Yeah.
is what the intent was.
Well, since it says consider, I'm fine with it. If it said do it. I'm really interested in it. Maybe somebody from the planning commission, or maybe Mike Bryan can give us more details to it. Anything else on chapter 5?
Can I just comment on, I
Yes.
did look up VRBOs. So there are some states that have passed laws that require VRBO and other types of organizations to collect the tax. Delaware is not one of those states.
So
So-
we need to lobby.
We could lobby the state to pass the law, and then you could have VRBO required to collect the tax and remit it to you.
Write me up something, will you?
Okay. In addition to gross receipts? In addition.
Sounds
Wait, I'm
good.
sorry, repeat that, in addition to gross receipts?
In addition to gross, right, our tax that on short-term rentals is not the gross receipts tax, it's a rental tax, and they are required to collect, if a local municipality, if the state has passed a law saying that municipalities or jurisdictions are allowed to pass laws requiring a rental tax, then you can require VRBO to collect the rental tax and remit it. It's through an account that they're talking about here that you have to set up with them as
Okay.
the owner. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's worth advocating.
yeah.
Yeah, I just asked them to look into it. We'll lobby our General Assembly.
Yeah.
Very good, gang. We've got through chapters 2, 4, 5. Left to do is environmental protection, chapter 7. And then some heavy-duty chapters, I think, reviewing the executive summary and the implementation, as well as the appendix. I would like to adjourn the meeting shortly, if that's all right. We do need to discuss our next agendas that I need to post today. Would be for a week from today, May 24th, at 9 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Will that work for you all?
I will not be at the 2 o'clock.
You will not? Is it all right if we plan for both? Everybody okay with that? So we'll plan for that. And you've got the draft agendas, 3 of them to get out. And with that, I want to thank everybody thank you, Lauren, for your help there. I'd like to adjourn this meeting at 4:12 PM. Thank you very much. Got a lot done.
The upstairs are the